Okay, class, let's get into things. Let's start with the who cares question. Who cares about employees' personality? Yeah? Do you care what your colleagues' personalities are? Do you care what your boss's personality is? What your subordinates' personalities are? Yeah? You probably do. You probably want a boss that's kind, reliable, consistent, who looks after you. Yeah? Just for example. Um, these are all things that people vary on. Yeah? So, who cares about personality? One nice answer to that question, class, can be found in airports, specifically in airport bookstores. Now, I don't know when you'll next be in an airport, class, with all this coronavirus pandemonium going on, but when things do settle, and you find yourself back in an airport, take a look at the business book aisle, class, and note all the different experts prescribing personality at work. Yeah? Some people like Sheryl Sandberg say that you're going to want to be assertive at work, class. It's good to be assertive, to lean in. Yeah? Then you've got Bob Sutton saying that we don't want assholes at work, class. We don't like jerks. We want workplaces where people are civilized, that treat each other with civility and politeness and respect. Mm. We also like people at work who are reliable, consistent, class, who are dependable, and who generally follow the rules. Yeah, who are effective people. Conscientiousness, class. And we also don't like colleagues who are prone to anger. Yeah. Now, these are all things that people vary on. Yeah? Some people are more assertive than others. Some people are more likely to be jerks than others. Some people are more conscientious and dependable than others. And some people are just more naturally angry. And others are just more naturally chill. Yeah? Also known as neuroticism, which is a tendency to experience negative emotions like anger. Hmm. So, these things, according to these experts at least, are fairly consequential at work. And I think that lines up with many of the intuitions we have about what matters in organizations. You generally want these things up here and not these things down here. Now, what makes personality so complex, class, is that there is so much junk out there. There's stuff like emotional intelligence, the Myers-Briggs type inventory, the DISC model, and grit that, well, let's just say these things don't do what they say on they don't do what they say on the tin, class. And I'll explain in more detail as we go through the lecture. Now, class, one consultant I found does personality testing based on bird profiles, class. So this company will give you a test and kind of figure out, hey, are you more of a peacock or are you more of an owl? Imagine, class, making consequential business decisions on the basis of a job candidate or an employee's bird type. I don't know. Anywho, that is just part of the complexity, class. The other part is that personality tests are pretty widely reviled, class. They're very controversial. So, here is a case of a lady in West Virginia, class, who applied for a job as a standard supermarket job, cashier, bagger, and stocker at a Kroger, which is kind of like their Woolies. Yeah. Now, as part of the selection process, this lady had to take a 50-item quote unquote personality test that would predict whether she would be friendly and communicate well with customers. This was appalling for her, and on the basis of this test, she was apparently, or she believes, was not given the job, and so she got litigious over it, class. Now, in this article, we have this fascinating little quote here unpacking what's going on. Yeah, so this expert, Annie Paul, claims that these type of tests don't really tell employers anything about how people will behave on the job. My research persuaded me that they really don't. What research? I don't know. And the claim, additionally, is that while these tests make HR people feel like they are sorting the applicant pool successfully, actually, personality is situational, class, and so it's just not very reliable. Now, class, let's be charitable and engage with this point. It's a reasonable point. Yeah? Like, some days you may feel more introverted, some days you feel more extroverted. That's pretty normal, right? That makes sense. Or maybe you're shy in conferences or in unfamiliar places, but then you're nice and friendly and lively when you're with your group of friends. Yeah? In some places you're introverted, some places you're extroverted. Yeah? And so, yeah, situations do matter. And so the claim is, well, if it's all situation anyway, who cares about personality? We will revisit the situation issue as we proceed with the lecture, class. Now, of course, the controversy continues. Even academics, like an academic at Macquarie Uni, wrote this piece for the conversation, basically a screed trashing personality testing. Now, I have highlighted some lovely little passages for you. So the claim, psychologists cannot know another person's inner experiences. All they can work with are communications about them. That's fair enough. That's true. Personality tests cannot measure inner experiences. They measure honest and dishonest communications. Yeah. And so since people take these personality tests against their will, they might fake. Yeah. And so faking is so widespread, evidently this academic claims that it is surprising results are taken seriously. Now again, class, trying to be charitable, faking is a very real thing, and this makes intuitive sense. Now, as I discussed in week one, well, really more teased you in week one, and will cover in more detail in this lecture, faking does not matter as much as you think. I'll explain as we go. Now, more from this academic here. So, unlike role playing or habits where individuals adapt behavior, important quote here, a personality trait implies a lack of adaptability. Yeah, so basically, class, the claim is if you're an introvert, you are always an introvert and you cannot adapt. You cannot make yourself an extrovert to suit the circumstance. Yeah, if you are always if you're always friendly, then you can't ever disagree with someone else's opinion because it implies a lack of adaptability. And of course, adaptability is what underpins intelligence. And so, according to this academic, personality is then by definition negatively related to intelligence because you can't adapt, you are only that personality trait. That's the claim. Class, this claim is, it's bogus, okay? Personality has no correlation with intelligence, yeah? It's just two separate things. It makes no sense to say that personality is negatively related to intelligence. It doesn't make sense. But again, let's be charitable, yeah? Let's be charitable and look at the part of the claim that might pass muster, which is, well, if you are an introvert, are you always an introvert? Yeah. Does that mean you can't adapt and can't change? Does that mean you can't be flexible? Class, this whole article really comes from a sad misunderstanding of how personality works, and we'll unpack this as we go. But the point here, class, is that there is genuine controversy and genuine vitriol over the use of personality testing. And so, if people don't like it this much, is it still worth doing? That's the question we will answer as we proceed with the lecture, class. So, what exactly is personality? Here's a nice definition for us. Personality encompasses a person's relatively stable way of thinking, feeling, and acting in a variety of situations. That's personality. Now let's unpack the definition, class. Whenever you get a definition, you want to unpack every bit. So it encompasses a person's relatively stable. So personality, class, is generally stable, but not always the same. In much the same way that you might see yourself as the ultimate introvert, but you might, under some circumstances, be a bit more outgoing. Put yourself out there, be a bit more lively. Yeah? These things do vary, but they are relatively stable. Now, does personality change with age? Does it change over time? Yes, it does, class. There's even studies showing that people become more conscientious and reliable over weeks of consistently doing homework. Yeah, younger kids. Yeah, so personality can and does change. Yeah, there was a study showing that long-term job insecurity can make people less conscientious and more neurotic, more lazy, and more emotionally unstable. Your personality can change, but it is generally relatively stable, class. Now let's continue. It is a way of thinking, feeling, and acting. What does this mean, class? Uh, this means that a personality is a pattern. Class, it reflects a pattern of how you think, how you approach problems, yeah, how you feel, the emotions you're prone to experiencing, whether it's anger, happiness, sadness, and so on. And behavior, whether you behave in ways that are reliable or unreliable, whether you behave in ways that are open to others or close to others, and so on. Yeah. So these are patterns of behavior. And lastly, a variety of situations. Again, the basic premise, class, is that some aspect of personality is generally stable across situations. Not always. Of course, there'll be some situations in which you'll be more friendly and some situations in which you'll be more assertive than others. But there are patterns that run through the range of people situations, class. So that's the definition. Yeah. Now, personality uh, is useful, class, for criteria that are more social in nature. Yeah. So how people interact with others. Personality tends to be good for these criteria as well as for work motivation, especially conscientiousness. Now, the use of personality tests, while relatively uncommon, at least in that audit study I mentioned, is generally on the uptick. Now, this is from the textbook in the US. Is personality testing on the uptick in Australia? Well, someone's got to do the study. Someone's got to do the audit study. Maybe it'll be you. Honors thesis. Think about it. So, how does personality matter for outcomes, class? So, let's start with a problem. Let's say you want to hire someone for a job where you need people to show up for shifts, and absenteeism is a big issue. You can't have people suddenly being absent. That's the outcome, yeah? And then you want to measure, say, conscientiousness as a predictor of that, which is generally conscientiousness is, are you reliable? Are you trustworthy? And so on. So, how does conscientiousness end up mattering for your, what is this? For absenteeism. So, people who are generally conscientious, who have a broad disposition for being reliable, yeah, who just tend to be that way, will be more likely to, in every moment, just moment by moment, they'd be more likely to be more committed, more reliable. Yeah, they tend to have state conscientiousness. They're just like this from moment to moment. Not every moment, but on average, more moments than not, they will be conscientious. Yeah, and so because you're like this more moments, that influences what you do. So you're more likely to actually wake up in the morning early when the alarm rings. You're more likely to actually inform your supervisor if you can't make it ahead of time rather than just not showing up to a shift and leaving them in the lurch. Yeah. So these states then influence what you do from moment to moment, and then what you do from moment to moment influences your absenteeism, the outcomes. Yeah, so that's how we get from a personality trait to an outcome. Now, where do situations come in? Some situations, class, are stronger than others. A strong situation, class, is a situation in which there are clear norms for behavior. So, for example, in military settings where there are very, very strong norms for how to present and carry yourself from day to day, you might feel lazy, but you're still gonna show up on time. More likely, you will, regardless of the state, conform to the situation. Not always, but a lot of the time the situation will change this effect. Now, in weak situations where there are no clear norms, then personality is more likely to matter. Yeah? So, in situations where there isn't a lot of social pressure, there isn't a lot of structure, personality drives what people do. In strong situations where there are clear norms and clear structures, then the situation is king or queen, is royalty, so to speak, and so the situation drives what people do. Get it? Yeah, that's why in the military, regardless of the range of people's personality traits, you tend to get a lot of fairly consistent behavior. It's a strong situation. It shapes behavior very, very forcefully. Weak situations, less so. And in weak situations, you tend to see personality shining much more. Now, let's talk about where personality comes from. Now, class, for years, people have struggled with trying to understand why people are different. Why do people vary? Yeah? And this goes all the way back to antiquity, class, to the ancient Greeks, who said that, well, if you want to know why some people are happy and some people are angry and some people are just naturally sad, you have to look at their body fluids. Yeah, this is the humor model of personality, where some people are sanguine. Yeah, they have a lot of blood and so they're friendly. Some people are choleric. They have a lot of choler, black bile, I think, and so they're very aggressive. Some people are melancholic and they have some other body fluid. I don't remember, but basically, you have four types of personality that roughly line up with different body fluids that seem to be more present in what people have in their bodies. It's grasping at straws to understand why people vary. Now, class, oops, I think I got the order wrong. So, there are other models of personality, class. Um, we have here models based on palmistry. Yeah, I've done a fair bit of palmistry just for fun in my time, and yeah, claiming to read what people are like based on the lines on their palm and the size of the various mounts on the palm itself. Yeah, I mean, again, the whole point is people struggling with the mystery of why human beings vary. Why do we vary? Why are we different from one another? Yeah? Now, class, the most productive approach to understanding why people vary is something called trait theory. Yeah? Now, a trait is a relatively stable, and relatively lasting pattern of behavior and motivation. Remember our definition, class? It is a relatively stable way. A trait captures a kind of way of thinking, of feeling, or of acting, class. Yeah. So a trait is something like conscientious, yeah, or extroverted. Yeah. Now there are a couple of trait theories that will get used. These are not examinable. Yeah. Other than the five-factor model, these are not examinable. I just want to point out that the three-factor model by Eysenck is basically a precursor to the five-factor model, and Cattell's 16PF, which is another common test used, can basically be rendered parallel to the five-factor model. So ultimately, it comes down to this model. Yeah, and there's the Myers-Briggs type inventory, which we'll get to separately when we talk about crappy personality theories. Okay, now let's go to the five-factor model. Now, if you have taken a class in organizational behavior or maybe a basic HR class, you will have encountered the five-factor model. The claim in the five-factor model class is that people vary along five general buckets of traits. These traits are extroverted. Are you friendly or not? Actually, that should be an A, extraversion. Spelling doesn't matter, but personality purists spell it extraversion. Agreeableness, which is being friendly, yeah, be generally liking other people. Conscientiousness, being reliable and trustworthy. Neuroticism, which is an old word, but really it just means being emotionally unstable and prone to anger, prone to negative feelings. And lastly, openness to experience, which is a kind of open-mindedness or kind of intellectualism trait, like kind of being into like smart stuff. And this doesn't correlate much with intelligence, interestingly. So, the order of these traits, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness, roughly matches the order of how much these things predict people's behaviors, with extroversion kind of mattering more and openness mattering less in daily life. Now, at work, conscientiousness is king. And we'll get to this later on when we talk about criteria. Now, class, you have encountered the five-factor model, but where did it come from? How did people decide that these were the five building blocks of personality, right? Like the five Lego bricks from which the whole structure of personality is built. Where does that come from? Now, where this comes from, class, is from lexical studies. So, here's how a lexical study works, class. In a lexical study, people are given, oops, okay, let's just use this slide. People are given a bunch of adjectives and asked to rate other people they know. So these are adjectives just from the dictionary, just from any English dictionary. So words like, how do you describe other people? Friendly, yeah, or kind, or obnoxious, yeah. So imagine you're given a list of adjectives pulled from the dictionary and asked, hey, can you rate your best friend on all of these adjectives? These adjectives are traits, yeah? But basically rate them on all of these adjectives pulled out from the dictionary, yeah? And so you come up with, fill up this questionnaire about your friend, and so what you get is ratings of your friend on each of these adjectives, yeah? Now, what what you can do with these ratings, class, so you're rating them on 200 different words, for example, you can run a statistical technique called factor analysis to kind of look at these 200 adjectives and look for the ones that go together. So people who are judged to be very kind tend to also be judged as very friendly, yeah. And then you have other buckets here. People who are judged to be very reliable are also judged to be very trustworthy, yeah. And so basically we get these 200, 300 adjectives and collapse them into five buckets. And the research shows time and again across cultures that by and large, class, there are these five buckets that capture the range of descriptions that we have for other people. So class, this is a model of personality that is not based on, people guessing. It's based on asking people, conducting research and asking, how do we evaluate others? So class, these big five ratings are the natural ways by which we judge other people. When we think about other people, we think, are they friendly? We think about, are they outgoing? Are they friendly? Are they reliable? Are they unstable? And are they open-minded? Yeah, these are the natural categories of how we evaluate others. And so that is what we use in selection processes as well. But I just wanted to make it clear that this has an origin in natural language, class, yeah? Okay, so here we have a Nice little test of the big five. If you haven't taken one of these yet, class, pause the video and answer these questions. Okay, back. Now, the scoring, class, can be found over here. Yeah. Now, for the items in bold, you're going to want to score them in reverse. So a 5 becomes a 1, a 4 becomes a 2, and a 3 remains a 3. So add them all up and you should get scores for the big five, and you can see how you compare to American norms for these five factors. So again, these big five are so these are let me put this another way, class. These are some of the adjectives that would be clustered under these five factors. So people who are conscientious would generally be described as dependable, organized, reliable, so on and so forth. Not careless, not sloppy, not negligent, etc., etc. Yeah, these are the adjectives that coalesce together for agreeableness. Yeah, agreeable people are kind, agreeable people are helpful, they're warm. Yeah, so people tend to be rated on all these roughly the same. Yeah, they tend to be rated low on things like being callous and being selfish. Yeah, so these are the adjectives that come together under the label of agreeableness. These are labels that researchers came up with to kind of say, how do we describe the thing that runs in common in this list of adjectives? Yeah, where this is high and this is low. The next bucket is neuroticism, described by words like nervous, moody, emotional, as opposed to calm, relaxed, secure. Class, neuroticism also goes by the term emotional stability in reverse. Yeah, so someone who is low in neuroticism will be emotionally stable. Then for openness, we have adjectives like curious, creative, refined. Yes, this is the intellectualist component, and as opposed to being simple, yeah, traditional, conventional, not willing to rock the boat. Then you have extroversion, class. Adjectives like passionate, talkative, dominant, yeah, as opposed to inhibited, reserved, shy. Yeah. So that's where these five come from. They reflect buckets of the ways in which we describe other people. So in the following slides, class, fair warning, there is some profane language that comes from published research, specifically some word clouds of extroversion. So I encourage you, class, to look through these word clouds in your own time because they are super interesting. So this is from Facebook research where they conducted personality testing on various people and looked at what they post, like the language they used in their posts. So people who are extroverted use language like this, words like party, can't wait, weekend, chillin', having fun with bestie, tonight, so so so. Uh, a lot of descriptions of family like cousin, sister, bestie, hanging, babysitting, party. Yeah, so there you go, right? These are the words that extroverts use. So extroverts are generally people who seek social activity. Sorry, I keep forgetting to correct myself. Extroverts. Now, I have no excuse, class. I made these slides and I made this typo. So if you use extroversion or extroversion, I don't really care. It doesn't matter. But a personality stickler will say it's an A in extraversion, not extroversion, but whatever. Okay, so again, these are people who seek social activity and they tend to experience more positive emotions, class. So extroverts tend to be happier. And this has been shown fairly consistently. In fact, class, there are studies showing that if you get an introvert and tell them, hey, can you pretend to be an extrovert? They start to feel happier. Yeah, social connection makes people happy, even if you're an introvert. Fascinating stuff. I'm happy to forward you the paper if you're interested. Now, the thing about extroversion that people don't tend to overlook is that it comes with an element of impulsivity. Yeah, extroverted people tend to enjoy stimulation. They're occasionally called sensation seeking. So extroverts are more likely to seek out experiences like skydiving, going on roller coasters. They just want that stimulation, class. And this aspect of extroversion is sometimes called surgency. It's a tendency to just have a lot of energy. Yeah, so extroversion has this component of energy, drive, and focus on being stimulated. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, class, we have introverts. Now, these are the words that introverts use: anime, computer, internet, Final Fantasy, Pokemon, manga, Doctor Who, a lot of computer stuff, a lot of anime, Japanese media stuff, a lot of like OMG, WTF, and old school emoticons, more computer stuff, and where the extroverts had so, so, and so in various lengths, the introverts had no, no, and no in various lengths. So again, this helps you understand how introverts are different. So class, introverts generally prefer to avoid social activity. Yeah, introverts tend to experience less positive emotions, so they tend to be less happy. This doesn't mean they're more sad, they're just less happy. Yeah, there's a difference. Now, class, introverts tend to avoid stimulation and tend to be more deliberative. They tend to take things slow instead of kind of going fast and loose like the extroverts. The introverts tend to take it slow, think things through, and tend to avoid overstimulating themselves. Now, class, there is a common misconception that introverts are people who get tired when they go to parties and hang out with other people. It's like their battery gets drained and so they just can't anymore. Whereas extroverts always get energy from hanging out with other people. Class, this is bullshit. And this is bullshit that comes from the Myers-Briggs approach to personality. Both introverts and extroverts get tired of people eventually. Nobody gets unlimited energy from people. Everyone gets drained. And so there are a lot of people who think they are introverts because they have heard this misconception. But actually, they're extroverts because they do enjoy social activity and they do seek it out. They just get drained like everyone else. So, yeah, a common misconception to bear in mind, class. Next, we have neuroticism, class. Now, pardon the language, these are the things that neurotics tend to say: depression, depressed, I hate, uh, the F word, bloody, a lot more curse words, negative valenced words, a lot of like stressed, depressed, frustrated, annoyed, more cursing, more depressed, sad words, negative language. So people who are neurotic tend to use this sort of language on social media, class. So neuroticism is an old psychological word. It just basically means being prone to anxiety and being less emotionally stable. Yeah, so your emotions are just more in flux and you're just more vigilant, more watchful. Neurotics experience more negative emotions, class, and tend not to like themselves. So one core signal of neuroticism is just low self-esteem. They just naturally go together. People who are neurotic tend not to like themselves. Now, the opposite of neuroticism, so low neuroticism, is emotional stability. Class, look at the difference here. Lakers success, beautiful day, greatness, great weekend, a lot of NBA stuff, a lot of sports stuff, a lot of a lot of gratitude. Note how gratitude comes to play for people who are emotionally stable. A lot of like spending time with people they care about, and so on. Mm. So people who are emotionally stable are, they're not neurotic, they're less emotionally volatile. They don't experience heavy fluctuations in emotions. People who are emotionally stable are less likely to get angry when things go wrong. Their emotions are just a lot more solid. Yeah, and so these people experience fewer negative emotions, class, and they are much more likely to like who they are, have higher self-esteem. Now, class, we have agreeableness. So, again, note how the word cloud for agreeableness is wonderful, amazing, positive things. There's some uh, religious speak, yeah, a lot of like saying good things about people, wonderful, grateful, amazing, awesome, fantastic. So the thing about being agreeable, class, is that agreeable people tend to be pro-social and altruistic. So these are people who just like other people. They just they just evaluate everyone and everything in positive ways, and they tend to be more kind. Yeah, tend to be more cooperative and polite. Now, the opposite of this is disagreeable people. Again, the word cloud is very, very telling. So, people who are disagreeable, in other words, people who are jerks, yeah, are more antisocial, more selfish, but also more confrontational. So, if you're in a situation where you want to avoid groupthink and you need someone who is willing to rock the boat, you're going to want someone disagreeable. Yeah? Disagreeableness has its place to prevent groupthink. Then we have conscientiousness, class. So, conscientious, again, these are people who are very reliable, dedicated people, yeah? And these are the ways they express themselves on social media. They talk about the gym, workout, like getting things done, and a lot of like other positivity around. Notice they talk about rest and vacations too, so reliable people know when to take a break. So, conscientious people, class, are organized, they have high self control, able to manage their impulses well, and are able to pursue goals successfully and with dedication. Conscientiousness is also the only personality trait that is reliably associated with mortality. Specifically, conscientious people live longer, they have less mortality. And that's after accounting for other personality traits, other control variables, and so on. And not to bury the lead, class, conscientiousness is one of the most valued traits to select for at work. The opposite is low conscientiousness, and oof, my, this word cloud. Yeah, these are people who are disorganized, on the lazy side, and tend to be irresponsible. Yeah, so if your friends on social media who speak like this, yeah, well, there you go. Then, lastly, we have openness to experience, class. So these are people who are open-minded, and well, you can kind of tell from the language they use, talking about art, poetry, the universe, writing, dreams, etc., etc., politics, geography, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah, kind of very new agey a little bit, but generally, people who are high in this trait, who score high in this trait, are curious, imaginative, tend to be open-minded, and tend to err on the unconventional side. Yeah. On the other hand, you have people who are more conventional, and yeah, this is the way they communicate. Yeah, not very clear English in a lot of the cases, but these people are conventional, close-minded, and prefer to do things the traditional way. So, of course, if creativity is important for the job, you may want to select for high openness, for example. Now, class, that's it. If you want to look at the source for these word clouds, you can check this article. Yeah, it's in PLOS ONE, which is a free and open access journal. So just Google it, and you should be able to read the article and see more word clouds. They've got word clouds by gender and age too. Now, lastly, class, we said, or rather, I said before, that there are 5 buckets of descriptions that we use to describe other people. And these 5 consistent buckets that show up across cultures, across samples. Now, these buckets have kind of sub-buckets, yeah? These traits contain narrower facets. So, for example, when we say that someone is conscientious, we can kind of divide the adjectives into stuff relating to industriousness, which is working hard, and orderliness, which is following rules and being systematic. Yeah, so these are 2 separate facets of conscientiousness. They tend to go together, but not always. Another example, class, for neuroticism here, some are very volatile. They tend to be angry, angry and impulsive, whereas some just tend to kind of hide in their shell and withdraw. These are people who are more anxious, depressed, vulnerable, don't like themselves. Yeah, so we have 2 separate facets here of neuroticism. They often go together, but not always. Now the question, class, is which do you use for selection? Do you want to select on conscientiousness, or do you want to select on industriousness? Yeah. If you are interested in people who are outgoing, do you select on extroversion, or do you select on enthusiasm or assertiveness, for example? Now, the key to answering this question is the bandwidth principle. Now, the bandwidth principle is a principle that is specific to personality. This does not apply to cognitive testing. This is specific to personality. And because what I'm going to say here contradicts what I said about intelligence in the previous lecture. So it's personality specific, which is that broad and narrow trait, whereas in the previous lecture I said that narrow cognitive abilities tend not to matter much. What we find here is that narrow facets have their place, which is a narrow facet would predict narrower criteria, a broader trait would predict broader criteria. So, for example, in the case of conscientiousness, class, if you want to predict something like job performance, which is very broad, then you're going to want a broad trait like conscientiousness, not one of these narrower facets and subfacets. Now, if you want to predict something very narrow, which is following the guidelines laid out in the manual for the job, for example, then you're going to want to select for orderliness, because then you are predicting a narrow criterion, which is following instructions, and so you want a narrow facet. Yeah, this is the bandwidth principle. So broadband traits, class, like conscientiousness, are good for broadband outcomes like performance. Narrow traits like orderliness are good for narrow outcomes like following instructions. Understand? Okay, that's it for the basics of personality. Next, we will get into personality testing.